Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, and we're back to have another innovator interview, a conversation about how we can reduce our impact on the environment and improve the sustainability of our economy. We're going to talk today about electronic vehicles, and particularly the metals we need to make their batteries. The rise of electronic vehicles comes with a lot of hard choices. The availability of cobalt and lithium needed to make batteries, for example, may be so limited that we must begin new mining projects to make enough batteries for the EV fleet of the future. The Department of Energy, however, has warned that 58% of the world's cobalt supply is located in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and they sell 80% of that cobalt to China. So we're going to be running short. However, new cobalt and lithium deposits have been identified in Idaho and Nevada, respectively. That raises the prospect for more mining, and environmentalists are justifiably concerned that nature will pay the price again for human progress. So we're speaking today with Trent Mell, who is the CEO of Electra Battery Materials. Its goal is to make North American battery manufacturing self-sufficient and circular. In other words, we're going to use that metal over and over again to power our EVs. The company is developing two projects, a battery materials park that will process and recycle batteries that will be located in Ontario, Canada, not in California, although there is an Ontario in California. And it has also leased a large cobalt and copper deposit at Iron Creek in Idaho, which the company plans to mine. The Battery Materials Park project, which will open this year, processes the raw ore from the mine and recycles used EV batteries. Electra Battery also estimates that approximately 250,000 tons of lithium-ion batteries are already in use that can be recycled by 2025, substantially reducing the need for new mining. You can learn more at electrabmc.com. Electra BMC is all one word, no space, no dash. electrabmc.com. Welcome to the show. How are you, Trent?
I'm great, Mitch. Looking forward to this, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. I wanted to start by asking, can you lay out the challenge we face as a society in electrifying our transportation and other sectors of the economy? How much cobalt, lithium, and other metals and rare earths are we going to need, say by 2030?
Right. Well, let's start with the challenges, and they're numerous, right? We've got, of course, the war in the Ukraine. So we got to start with geopolitics. What has been the focus, I guess, of a lot of policy decisions of late. But when you start looking at sanctions on Russia, you've taken away the second largest producer of nickel, right, from American vehicles. So geopolitics looms large. Where are we going to get our material from? And not far from that, I'd outline resource nationalism as well. The push, Indonesia, for instance. We've got a lot of nickel, but we want it processed here on shore. And so everybody's got their angle on how they're going to beneficiate and procure the value chain for themselves. And once you get past the politics, carbon footprint is the next one. I'm sure we'll get into that, right? There's an ESG to driving a vehicle, but you got to get there. And there's a lot of ways, a lot of leakage, I will call, on that journey to low carbon or to a zero emissions vehicle, based on how it's being made, where it's being made, how far are you transporting it. And then lastly, it's the timeline. And you touched on this in your opening, right? How long is it going to take us to get these new supplies on stream? Because we do need more. If we're going to get 2030, 30% penetration or better, we're going to need new mines, and we can. I'm going to be maybe simplistic here. We can sort of close our eyes and have somebody else do it, right? Or we can take it upon ourselves to develop assets ourselves locally in a responsible fashion, which is tough for a lot of people, because I think there's for a segment of our stakeholders and maybe your listeners, there's a presumption that when you start talking about mining and putting holes in the ground, it's a bad or an undesirable thing.
Well, and I think that is certainly the immediate reaction a lot of people have before they think about this and think about the potential trade-offs necessary to achieve a zero carbon environment. But let me dig in on geopolitics for a minute, because you're absolutely right. The war, along with the pullback from what is roughly described as globalization towards self-sufficiency, is often very closely linked with nationalism, as you pointed out. If we are aiming to make North American EV battery building and processing and recycling completely self-sufficient, are we potentially creating tension with those partners who might be sources of the materials that we need to build up the resource, the inventory of resources we need to keep our EV fleet running?
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. So on the one hand, Mitch, I'd say building the electric vehicle plants, right, whether it be the assembly plants or the battery plants, I mean, that's bricks and mortar stuff and equipment. But when it comes to mining, we've got to work with what Mother Nature gave us, right? And you outlined the DRC, for instance. The DRC is effectively it's the Saudi Arabia from the 70s, right? What Saudi Arabia was for oil and gas, the DRC is to the automotive industry, and it's probably no more stark than that when it comes to the cobalt as a raw material. Lithium, we've got a lot more choices available to us. I think we're fortunate in America that we've got what we call the Idaho cobalt belt. It's a fairly unique geological feature, but I don't really see us as competing, right? There's such a, when you look at building an auto plant, 18 months or so to get that off the ground. Building a mine is 7-10 years minimum. In America, it's often longer than that. It could be 15, or sometimes it just doesn't proceed for all kinds of reasons. And so with the sort of supply demand projections, if you look at kind of 20% growth in raw material requirements year over year for vehicles, and really last year I think it was 100% penetration growth. I think the bigger concern I would have is that we're just not going to be able to get the materials on stream fast enough, and it could be demand destructive.
Okay, so just the practicalities of starting up to produce this fleet is what you're most concerned about. So let me ask this: does the recent infrastructure law, which included $3 billion in funding for EV battery supply chains, represent a sea change, or was this already a process underway and this will be gas on the fire?
Yeah, I think COVID maybe provided an impetus for, I might call it maybe it's a bit of a catch-up trade, right? The sheer volume, the quantum of the investment via the funding being proposed is notable. But let's be clear, we're way behind China. I think we know that, right? That's almost half of the EV market until last year was China, and so that raises two issues, right? One is national security. So from a defense perspective, which I think the last White House administration kind of drove home. But I think what we're seeing now is it's industrial policy, right? And it's our national interest from an economic perspective, and making sure our auto industry remains world class and world leaders. And so this funding helpful. It's hard to see. I mean, part of it is going to be infrastructure, making sure we've got the charging stations and whatnot, so that you've got the ecosystem that when we got a vehicle, we can actually charge it somewhere. But how it gets deployed, we're in this. Well, it's a generational transformation, right? What we're witnessing today with lithium-ion batteries started with phones and laptops, but now with vehicles, we're not going to see I don't think we'll see an industrial shift of this magnitude in our lifetime. And so there's a lot of governments competing for money. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree absolutely. In fact, I would say that this is bigger than IT by a major factor because we're shifting an energy platform. We're moving from fossil fuel to electrification, which of course we currently generate with a lot of fossil fuel. But once we get to renewables, that changes it. When you change your energy platform, you change everything. But that also is an opportunity to redesign everything. And to your point, we have we need a charging system, and there's $35 billion in the bill for that. The $3 billion for the supply chain issues, which of course COVID has made crystal clear for everybody. Is that going to change? Will it make it more reliable? And are we going to be able to count on getting enough cobalt and lithium to get the fleet built, do you think, domestically, or are we going to have to go overseas to get it?
That's a great question. So when I look at the funding and the funding agencies, right, this is largely DOE driven, and there's some DOD involvement as well. Mm-hmm. There is a great hesitancy, and this goes to policy, I suppose, and maybe a societal dialogue. There is a hesitancy to deploy capital into resource development, mine development. And so, if I take our example of our Iron Creek asset, it's not yet a mine; it's a project. I think it will be a mine one day. There's my dialogue discourses with government. There's an interest to help us with our mine once the material is out of the ground. So go permit, build it, extract it, and if you need help with infrastructure, with milling, refining, processing capabilities, or otherwise, we'll be there for you. But our policy imperatives today don't allow us to help you with the very top end of the supply chain. which, as I said, is the longest lead time in terms of
Right.
shortages. So there's a disconnect, and I understand the genesis of that. But until we address that, I have a view, frankly, that the whole mining discourse that we need to have, and getting away maybe from some negative legacies and memories of the past practices. I think it's got to be led by the auto industry, right? It's not. I think a mining executive, it's so obvious, patently obvious, that it's driven by self-interest. But if you got Mary Barra and Farley and Musk going to DC saying, "Hey, we need mining in America," then maybe we can have that dialogue. But until we get across that, this infrastructure law is not going to help with mine development.
Well, let's talk about mining, because this is the big issue for a lot of folks listening. And I part of my youth was spent on the Mesabi Iron Range in northern Minnesota, where a mine met a mile-wide hole in the ground that was about a half mile deep. And they they took all the material out, so there was no refilling it. Those holes are there forever, and they are scars on the planet. How are you going to manage the Iron Creek mine to prevent tailings from escaping? What are you going to do to restore and protect the environment around the mine while you're doing the mining itself?
Well, in Western U.S., of course, a lot of these states were born on mining, right? It was frontier land, and you came and you raped the land, raped and pillaged, and you moved on. And those legacies sadly remain, right? How many Superfund sites do we have across America today? And
so how do we have a good relationship with the land while mining?
Yeah, well, and there are some assets, and this wouldn't be us, but there are assets that were mined in the past, scars in the landscape, but with modern technology, they're still potentially profitable. There's still minerals that could be extracted, and so that presents opportunities for cleanups, right, and to leave the land in a better state than the past owners. But I think with new mine projects like ours, increasingly the appetite is to go underground, so you not have these massive pits. Sometimes you can't avoid it. The style of mineralization in Nevada, the big gold mines, Barrick and Newmont and others, right. These are massive pits. When I look at the state of Idaho and the Salmon Chalice National Forest, it's a tiny footprint. And if you've ever had the benefit of seeing what a modern mining operation looks like, by the time you're done, whether that's 7 years or 25 years of mining, everything's got to be brought back to its natural state. And you go back there 10 years thereafter, you should ideally you shouldn't be able to recognize that a mine was there. Go ahead.
I did read the environmental impact report, and it's clear you're going to be doing boring mining. You're going into the ground rather than digging up everything and then sorting it all out. How long will the mine be active once it's up and running? So are we talking about a process that's going to take 7 to 10 years to get going, and then it'll be live for 25 years?
Yeah, so we're still drilling, and that's the nature of the game, right? Mining is tough because you can't see the mineralization, right? You're putting little tiny drill bits in the center of the earth, and you're extrapolating how big the mine might be or what it might look like. So it takes a fair bit of effort. So we've got another couple of years of drilling. I don't think we're mining for about 5 years. Okay. And so our footprint that we would have there, I'll come back to that maybe. But if I look at what the mine life might look like, give us kind of a good 5 years to get into production. Thereafter, you're probably mining for 10 years or so. Open pit. So the idea would be you got a small footprint on surface. You try, even once you're extracting the material, you try to break up the rocks underground so that you're limiting the amount of waste rock that you bring to surface. Mm-hmm. And then open question whether we would build a processing facility right there in the forest, or whether we would haul it out to a nearby town and process there. But after 10 years, you're probably looking at certainly a couple of years of reclamation activity. And look, we're near the salmon river, and Idahoans love their outdoors. They love their fishery. And so we tell our people, you can't so much as look at that river. Nothing's going in there. And that's just the way you got to operate. Water is a precious resource. And it's not just the consumption rates, it's the purity levels. So we got a fair bit of work to do in engineering. I've been doing this for 20 years around the world, and you bring big company standards to small projects. Idaho is a real special place, but I think the nature of our asset is fairly small. It's a small high grade deposit, and we're looking at 2.5 acres. That's our footprint. 2.5 acres in a forest that's 6,000 acres in a 2.5 million acre forest. And even on our footprint, we'd be using, maybe a third of that might actually get disturbed before it's reclaimed.
So let's, in the meantime, you are going to be running the battery park and you're going to be recycling materials. We'd be also taking in ore from elsewhere in the world and processing it in the meantime?
Yeah, I get really excited on, call it the chemical side of the business. And so I came at it. I was an attorney earlier in life and then spent a lot of years in mining. And now I'm really in the processing side. And the battery, so the concept of a battery park is not new. It exists in Finland and it exists in various places in China. And the idea is to capture a bunch of synergies by co-locating the processing of mine feeds and recycled material and the first step of the battery making. And so what you achieve there is you're reducing your shipping and transport, so that goes to costs and carbon. You're also reducing your operating costs because you can keep metal, for instance, in a solution, aqueous form, and pipe it over to the next plant rather than having to crystallize and bag it and transport it. And you're saving on capital as well because there are steps of the process you can eliminate. So bringing everything together is the way of the future. We're seeing that up at our park, and I think the province of Quebec is moving in the same direction. And so we've got 4 phases. The first phase is cobalt processing. The material today is like everybody else, it's coming from Africa. So instead of shipping it to China, we're bringing it to North America. And then phase 2 is going to be the recycling. That's not far behind. We'll be doing a demonstration plant this summer, operating that in 2023. 3 and 4 are further out. It'll require some partnerships. It's going to be nickel processing. And then that first step of battery making, which we call precursor manufacturing.
So what are the sources of the recyclable materials that you're going to use? Where's it located and how much of it can be recycled to make new batteries?
Yeah, how much is, that's it. We've gotten really good on the recovery of material. So, first the sources. The most abundant source by far today is portable electronics. So laptops, phones, think of your power tools, kids' toys. Lots of that obviously have been around for years and is coming back. The one that people think of when they think of battery recycling is electric vehicles, but it's such a new market. The volume of those EVs coming off market, fortunately, a lot of them are still on the road. So it's still a fairly small market, some hybrids. And then the third source, which is going to get big as America builds out its supply chain. So I would say between now and 2025, 26, we're going to have a lot more battery making. The battery scrap, a new plant in particular, but even a mature plant can have wastage of up to 10%. The 10% of your raw materials ends up on the floor of the plant. And so the idea is you can create a real closed loop there and capture everything. So what does the capturing look like? Recoveries in a process like ours is well into the 90s. We all say above 95 because you don't want to say what that is, but I'll tell you it's somewhere between 96, 98% of the recoveries can be achieved. And that's cobalt, it's nickel, copper, lithium, graphite, and I'll say a question mark next to manganese because it can be done, but there's no margin. You do it for the right reasons, but you're not doing it for profit.
So are landfills a potential source of this material? Because we only recycled 15% of our e-waste, 17% here in the States, 15%, no, I'm sorry, it's the other way around, 15% here in the States and 17% globally. It sounds like we have a lot of lithium and cobalt and nickel and other material just sitting in the ground and near cities.
I think there's a nascent industry there, Mitch. Maybe you could kick it off. But look, in seriousness, I remember when platinum and palladium had a bit of a price spike about, I think it was around 2007. I was working for a palladium company, and none other than Carl Icahn and his lieutenant called in to us requesting a call. So I was shaking in my boots thinking, oh no, he's taking a run at our little company. But no, he wanted to understand platinum and palladium because he owned a whole bunch of scrap car dealership yards across I think it was the Northeast. And he was trying to understand why thieves were coming in, cutting off the catalytic converters to recover platinum and palladium. And we're kind of getting to that point, right? I think up until now, the recycle market, there's a lot of people that collect the batteries and shred them and try to recover the material. Our end, where you're actually refining, there's not a lot of avenues open to you. But as this market matures, and it's maturing fast, I could definitely see it's almost like a garbage, like a dumpster diving, right? I could see an industry going into these dumps and trying to recover some of these electronics that are otherwise just going to sit there in perpetuity, leaching into the world.
So let's move to the Ontario project and talk a little about that. You describe it as the world's lowest carbon solution for battery manufacturing. So how do you have a zero carbon goal, and can you get there?
Yeah, we've got Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll tell you, as I'll call myself a mining guy, I guess, at inception. The ESG world to me is exciting because now we're not just talking CSR, right? Remember, 10 years ago, we talked about, corporate social responsibility, and we pat ourselves in the head for building schools and, providing medicine to communities. With ESG, it's a quantification, I don't call it a game, it's a quantification process.
Right.
So anything and everything we do gets measured up, carbon in particular, right, gets measured up into the footprint of a Tesla Model 3, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And so the accountability is great. It starts with the consumer and the OEM, but it works its way right through the supply chain. And so for us, as we were conceiving of our plant, which by the way is not yet operating, we're in construction now, kind of 9 months away from first production. We did a life cycle assessment with a London-based firm. We compared ourselves to the Chinese cobalt refineries, which is where most of the world's cobalt is made, and looked at our carbon footprint. And we estimated, we'll have to revalidate this, we estimated just under 1.6 kilos of CO2 for every pound of cobalt sulfate product we make, as compared to 3.25 kilos of CO2 for a Chinese refinery, so kind of half the footprint.
So for the CO2 that you do produce, are you going to be scrubbing the emissions and so forth in order to capture it and minimize its escape to the environment?
Yeah, so here's a competitive advantage, both from a cost and an ESG perspective, is that our process is not a conventional pyrometallurgical facility. We're using heat-based applications to melt and smokestacks with emissions. Ours is hydrometallurgical. So what we receive, everything gets put into a solution. So it's a chemistry set, right? It comes in crushed and ground. We're using a leaching process and then a solvent extraction, and then you recirculate those reagents within your plant. So we're darn close to zero. We got a very senior executive joining us from one of the big mining companies, in fact, next week, and she's got 15 years of work, and her mandate is to work. Her title is VP Sustainability and Low Carbon. Right? What is our path to net zero? And I'm frankly not up the curve enough to be able to make these grand statements yet. I think there is a path. I don't quite know what that looks like, but if you look at our process, which is hydromet, so again, this in solution, but also we're powered by hydroelectric power, 100%. We've got two big competitive advantages, and so what our process means on the other end in the market. If we produce, our forecasted production, the idea is to remove 9,000 vehicles off the road per day, right? So our annual
equivalent of 9,000 vehicles.
Yeah, I'm sorry, the equivalent of combustion engines and replace them with EVs. So when I kind of do the math, right, that 1.6 kilos of CO2 annualized for our production, that's just a little under 40 tons of CO2 per year. And if I contrast that to 9,000 vehicles, that's, pick your formula. That's about 40,000 plus of carbon being removed from the atmosphere. Now, I'm not saying that's good enough, right? So that's maybe 1% as an offset, but how do you get that 40 lower? And as we all know, right, this is it's a journey, not a destination. I think we're off to a great start. We will have the greenest cobalt supply in the world, hands down. But obviously, you're going to strive to get better and better.
Well, when do you expect to set a net zero goal? Have you at least established that?
Yes. We're going to set a goal this year.
Okay.
And so part of being a startup is just, small team. And
Not
so
easy.
exactly. So we're building our ESG credentials this year, because I know intuitively, if you will, and with outside support, that we've got a great story. I don't think we tell it very well, so I think we're doing ourselves a disservice. But beyond that, you're right, Mitch. We've got to be able to set some goals that people can hold us accountable to. So that'll come before the end of 2022.
So going back to the 4,000 vehicles off the road, what percentage of EV production do you think that your facilities can support? Are you looking at 20%, 50%? Where do you want to be?
Yeah, and I guess, I guess it's a factor of how much of the fleet do we think could go electric. So I think last year in the U.S. there were about 15 million vehicles sold. On our part, for our cobalt plant at least, we're targeting 1.5 million vehicles being supplied for cobalt. So on that math, if it was 100% electric, we need 10 times more production than we're going to produce. Realistically, between now and 2030, you probably need maybe 3.5 times more. So it makes a good dent. That the challenge that I see in keeping that scale, that 1.5 million vehicle scale, is that the batteries are increasingly nickel rich, cobalt poor, if you will. We're thrifting on cobalt for various reasons. And so the nickel plant that we would need to match our cobalt is an order of magnitude, 2 orders of magnitude larger than what we're building. So we've got some work to do, but for now, for the next 2 years, it's going to be, let's get cobalt out to suppliers. Let's get into the recycling technology and prove ourselves out. Nickel and precursor, the step phases 3 and 4 of our plant is going to require about $500 million of investment and some partnerships, because nickel is quickly becoming a scarce commodity as we look to electrify the world.
And pretty volatile prices lately too.
Yes, indeed, volatile. In part, yeah, I mean, partly it's the Russia war, right? The Russia war created this crazy event on the London Metal Exchange, which itself doesn't trade a lot of nickel, but it's the bellwether, and it sent nickel up 3x before they had to shut down the exchange, reverse the contract trades, and try to stabilize the market. But it worked somewhat, but the prices today are such that 5 years ago people were complaining cobalt was too expensive. Now it's lithium's gone up 5 times, and now nickel's on a tear. So all the commodities are problematic, and the solution for us as consumers is maybe OEMs need to start buying their own mines so they don't have to suffer the vagaries of these crazy price swings.
Well, that kind of vertical integration does seem to be the direction a lot of folks are headed. I suspect that Elon Musk will be in this business sometime soon.
I think I could be first. Yeah, I would agree.
So the Department of Energy has suggested that you can make an EV battery without cobalt using nickel and iron. Obviously, still volatile pricing around nickel. Are you positioned to be able to continue to compete if you aren't making as much cobalt and you shift towards these alternative battery models?
Yeah, I think so. And I think we've got to take a long-term view of where the industry is going. So certainly our battery park is looking to be a player across the cathode part of the battery, as well as the recycling. What we're seeing though, with the battery plants that are being built in the U.S. are built around a particular technology. In the case of Tesla, it's nickel, cobalt, aluminum. In the case of everybody else, it's nickel, cobalt, and manganese. But to your point, there's a lot less cobalt, right? It used to be 30% of the cathode was cobalt. Now we're heading to an era. I think Tesla's down to 3%, and the new generation of batteries will be somewhere around the 5 to 7%. Having said that, what's happening with the batteries are a lot bigger, right? The F-150, the Hummer, the cars that we drive in North America are bigger, so you need a bigger battery, and we also demand longer range. So again, a bigger battery there and more of them. So net, even Tesla's projecting a higher global consumption of cobalt. But you make a point. There is another technology out there. It's called the LFP, lithium iron phosphate, which has been cheaper until lithium went ballistic, and now that's gone up. Price of LFP battery has gone up 6-fold. But the LFP battery, the beauty of that is it's the affordability. You can get a low range, a commuter, right? A low range vehicle for not a lot of money. They used to be kind of viewed as kind of garbage technology. You'd see them in China. They would have all kinds of problems. They don't work well in cold weather. But I think there is a role, right? In a, I don't know, think about Florida sort of golf community. You have that secondary car. So I think there's going to be sort of horses for courses, and we just got to adapt. Society will continue, but I think for the next 5 or 10 years, I don't see any problem. Well, 10 years certainly for cobalt and our plans there.
Well, it'd be interesting to me to see the vehicle fleet change in response to the geographic concern you just raised a moment ago. We do drive big cars. There's no doubt that's a kind of a shortcoming of Americans, but we also drive a lot further, and not just because we prefer to, but because our geography is so distributed. I mean, we are a land with a lot of land. And so we can also imagine that couple retired in Florida with a small electric vehicle that they do their commuting with, and a larger electric vehicle that maybe they do their vacationing in. And again, going back to, as we were talking about before, the transition to a new energy platform means we rethink everything.
Yes, I think that, and that's the discourse we haven't had yet, right? And we talk about it on the side, but as we're electrifying our fleet, it's what does our grid look like, right? Mm-hmm. How are we generating our power? And if you've got a coal-powered grid, well, you're undoing a lot of the good we're trying to do. And that's a lot more money going to be required there. I think it can be done, but that's going to take a lot longer. In Canada, where I'm based, it's mostly hydroelectric.
Yeah.
But
But the thing is, I mean, we imagine a little like people who first thought, let's replace a buggy with a car that we should build a buggy with an engine. But we may not even be thinking about what the EVs will really look like when we get to a new configuration.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And whether we need to own the vehicles, right? Whether you can lease them like an Uber, self-driving. So Henrik Fisker from Fisker Inc. Was on my board. He's still an advisor and a friend. He was designing, it's self-driving, but these little commuters. So imagine it's like a portable living room that you could drive around a big campus or airports or whatever. But you're right. I mean, it's only a matter of your imagination, and the more we're using software for mobility, the more your imagination can take root, and the options just balloon.
And of course, that means different battery configurations and a lot more. To your point earlier about the different chemistries we can use for batteries, there may be different applications for those different battery categories that we aren't even envisioning right now.
You're right, and then it raises another. Let's go back to the sustainability angle. Some of these battery technologies, like the more expensive battery is the one we're using in America. It's the nickel, cobalt, manganese. But the good thing about that is that you kind of want to recycle everything. These cheaper batteries that I talked about, lithium, iron, and phosphate, there's not a lot of incentive to recycle them. So you'll need policy, I guess, to drive that process. Could it be done? Absolutely, but the incentives aren't there to recycle those batteries. So cheaper, but it risks creating a different problem at the end of that life cycle.
So let me ask a final question, and it's one that I ask almost everybody who's on the show. What is in this case, the electric vehicle fleet look like, let's say in 2032, 10 years from today? What percentage of the fleet do you estimate we will be running on electricity versus fossil fuels?
Well, when I look at industry prognosticators, forecasters, 2030, let's say 2032, is often the date that they circle for. Usually it's 25 or 30% of the global fleet being electric. And 2 or 3 years ago, when you would hear that, and we were sitting at sort of 2% globally, you'd shake your head. That's never going to happen. And I will tell you, in my 5 years of being in this industry, we have overachieved every single year. And so Europe is, I don't know if they're at 10%, depending on the country. You're already in the 10s there. Norway, of course, is, I don't know where they are now. They were in the 30s. They might be in the 50s by now. So I guess my own prognostication would be, I think we're going to continue to overachieve unless we hit a wall on the sourcing side. So I could see 40% of the fleet being there. What it looks like, I mean, I think different technologies, right? Different size of batteries. I think now that we've got the range down, you're going to see the Fords and GMs of the world offer cheaper, lesser vehicles from a range perspective. But I think the golden chalice here that everybody is waiting for is what we call the solid state battery. So imagine twice the range for half the battery materials. You're solving, you've got 3 or 4 different chemical properties that you need to solve, and they're in conflict with each other. We're making progress, but that to me is going to be a game changer for the industry. And I think we might start to see some of that in the next 5 years.
Wow. Okay. I know where that is going, and it brings up Moore's law. I mean, we are on a similar trajectory in terms of making smaller and more powerful in the sense of longer battery life. Solid state in 5 years. I hope to see that.
Yeah. Well, I think they're trying. The manufacturing process is proving challenging, but it's I'm out on a limb on that statement, but I do think we'll get there.
Well, Trent, I want to thank you for taking time to talk with us today.
Thanks for your time. It's really appreciated.
We've been talking with Trent Mell. He's the CEO of Electra Battery Materials, and you can find out more about Electra Battery Materials at electrabmc.com. Electra BMC is all one word, no spaces, as I always like to point out. Folks, human history is a record of trade-offs that we have made between different consequences of our decisions. And as we can tell from the impact we've had on the climate, we don't always make good decisions, but there is an opportunity to make better ones now. There are hard choices, as I said at the outset of this interview, that we have to come to terms with if we're going to move to an electrified economy. And that means that we're going to have to make some decisions about what degrees of environmental impact that we are going to accept as we move forward. It is possible to design an industry that doesn't leave a toxic legacy, but we've never really felt the necessity to do so because it was cheaper and more profitable just to ruin the environment. Let's do it differently this time. Folks, we hope to take a few minutes to share this podcast, particularly because it deals with the EV battery question, but all of our podcasts with your friends, family, the people down the street. Just start these conversations so that there are more ideas floating around out there, more informed people contributing to the dialogue, and so that we can create less waste and create a more healthy and sustainable world as we move into the 21st century and 22nd century. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, your host, and we're going to be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, I hope you'll take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.